The wind came first, then the rain, then the wagon. Clara Whitmore held the reins with hands raw from cold, her daughter wrapped in a horse blanket against her chest. Ruth's breath rattled soft and shallow, and every mile of frozen road had asked the same silent question: how much longer? The gate of the Kane Ranch rose out of the gray like a promise Clara had no right to ask for. "I need work," she said, before the rancher on the porch could speak. "Any work you have." Josiah Kane looked at her the way a man looks at weather he can't stop. Tired eyes, jaw already set against saying yes. He was closer to 60 than 50, silver crowding out the brown at his temples, his hands scarred rough from 3 decades of rope and rail. A man who'd buried more than most and built a wall around what was left. "I got one job," he said, "mucking stalls and hauling wood till first thaw. Hard work. Ain't fit for... I'll take it." He studied the girl in her arms, small and pale as the snow starting to fall. Something in his chest, boarded shut 11 winters ago, creaked open half an inch. "Get her inside," he said, "before you answer for me." That should have been the end of it. A hard job, a desperate woman, nothing more. Then Clara asked her question, and it broke something in him that 11 years hadn't touched. If stories like this one, the quiet kind, the ones that stay with you, mean something to you, stick around. Like this video and subscribe, so the next one finds you. Now, back to Miller's Creek. By the fire, Clara laid Ruth on the settee and pressed a hand to her daughter's forehead. Josiah stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, unsure whether he was welcome in his own front room. Her husband, Daniel, had been dead 5 months, thrown from a colt he'd broken for wages too small to matter, 2 counties over. The funeral had taken what little they'd saved. The eviction notice on their rented plot had taken the rest. She hadn't told Josiah any of that yet. She hadn't told him much of anything yet. "She's not going to make the winter, is she?" Clara said. Not a question, a fact she had already buried once and was carrying again. "Doc Foss say that?" "Doc Foss said pray." She smoothed Ruth's hair. "So I'm asking you instead. If it comes to it, if I lose her here, on your land, will you let her rest beside your wife? I saw the stone on the ridge from the road. I don't want my girl in a stranger's ground. I want her somewhere tended." Josiah didn't answer. He turned and walked out into the snow without his coat, and Clara understood she had asked a man to reopen a grave he hadn't spoken of since he dug it. By morning, word had already reached the bunkhouse. Wendell Cross, his foreman going on 20 years, found Josiah at the corral fence. "Whole town's gonna talk," Wendell said. "Widow with a dying child, and you giving her house room instead of turning her toward the church poor fund." "She asked for work? I gave her work." "You gave her hope you can't afford to hand out twice." At the Mercantile that week, the talk was worse. Men who'd known Josiah since before Margaret died called him a fool for the food he'd be feeding a child who wouldn't see spring. Women whispered that grief had finally cracked him clean through. Emmett Bennett, who ranched the section east of Caneland and had wanted to buy him out for 3 years running, said it loudest of all, that a man soft enough to take in a dying stranger's child was a man who wouldn't last another season holding his own ground. At church that Sunday, a woman named Prudence Hale moved her family to the far pew the moment Clara sat down, loud enough for the whole room to hear that she wasn't about to let her children catch consumption sitting too close. Clara held Ruth's hand through the entire service and didn't say a word. 5 months of widowhood had taught her that the cruelty of strangers cost her nothing she hadn't already lost. Josiah heard every word said about him and answered none of it. He went home and split wood until his hands bled, because it was easier than explaining why he hadn't said no. The work Clara did was honest and hard, and she never once asked for less of it. She hauled water before dawn, mended fence in weather that would have sent a hired man home, and still found an hour each evening to sit with Ruth and read to her by lamplight. Josiah began finding reasons to be nearby when she did, fixing a hinge that wasn't broken, checking a horse that didn't need checking. One evening he caught her crying quietly over the wash basin and nearly walked away. Instead he asked, plain and rough, "What is it?" "I keep thinking I brought her here to die comfortable instead of to live," Clara said. "I don't know if that makes me a good mother or a coward." "Neither," Josiah said, Makes you someone who ran out of choices and still got up every morning anyway. I know a little about that." It was the first time he'd said anything close to the truth out loud in over a decade. The following week, riding fence on the North Ridge, Clara came close enough to read what she'd only seen from a distance before. Margaret Kane's grave, exactly where the town said it would be. And beside it, half buried in old snow, a second stone, smaller, weathered, easy to miss unless a person was looking. Hannah Kane, 6 years old. She said nothing to Josiah, but that night she left a sprig of dried lavender on his porch rail, and in the morning it was gone, tucked inside his coat pocket, and neither of them spoke of it. Ruth, for her part, decided the rancher was worth winning over long before he decided the same about her. She left a carved wooden bird on the porch step where he'd find it, clumsy, one wing shorter than the other, a thank you for the afternoon he'd helped her mother brace a broken fence post back into the ground. Josiah turned the bird over twice in his scarred hands and said nothing. The next evening, a small wooden horse sat beside it, carved clean, mane flowing like it was caught mid-gallop. Neither of them ever spoke of the trade. But after that, Ruth started saving him a seat by the fire, and Josiah started remembering to duck under the low doorframe on his way in, like a man who'd finally decided he meant to stay a while. One night, after Ruth was asleep, Clara found him on the porch, staring at nothing in particular. "Tell me about her," she said. "Margaret." He was quiet long enough that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She used to say this ranch had more room in it than we'd ever fill. I always figured she was wrong." He looked at the lit window where Ruth slept. Turned out it just needed the right people in it. It was the closest either of them had come to saying aloud what they'd both started to feel. Doc Foss came again in the second week of December, and this time his news split the sky open. Ruth's lungs weren't failing from consumption after all. The wasting had come from months of poor food and colder nights than a small body could fight off. With proper broth, warmth, and a tonic he could get only from the city apothecary, she had a real chance, a real one, hope, and a new problem in the same breath. The nearest apothecary was 2 days' ride, and the banknote on the Kane Ranch was due before the new year. Cattle prices had fallen through the floor that season, and Emmett Bennett had quietly bought up Josiah's debt from the bank, hoping to force a sale. Josiah didn't tell Clara about the note. He sold 2 horses he couldn't spare and rode out for the tonic himself into weather that had no business letting a man through. The storm caught him on the return, 4 miles from the gate. His horse went down in a drift. He walked the rest, tonic bottle wrapped inside his shirt against his own chest to keep it from freezing, and he did not remember reaching the porch. Clara found him at first light, half buried, blue-lipped, breathing in shallow pulls that matched her daughter's. She dragged him inside by the collar of his coat and did not let herself cry until the fire was lit, and both of them, the old rancher and the sick child, lay fighting for breath under the same roof, and she did not know which one she might lose first. For 3 days, Miller's Creek did not know if Josiah Kane would live. Wendell rode for the doctor. Bennett's foreclosure papers sat unopened on the kitchen table. Clara couldn't make the debt disappear, but she wasn't about to let a dying man wake to that letter on top of everything else. She put them away in a drawer and said nothing, and prayed there'd be time later to worry about what they meant. On the 4th morning, his eyes opened. The first word out of him was Ruth's name. "She's better," Clara said, and her voice broke on the word. "The tonic worked. She asked for you before she asked for breakfast." Josiah turned his face away toward the window, and for a long moment his shoulders shook in a way 11 years of silence had never once allowed. "I let myself love a child again," he said finally. "Thought that door was nailed shut for good reason." "What reason?" "Wasn't home when Hannah took sick. Was 2 days out with the herd. Margaret sent for me and I didn't get back in time for either of them." He looked at Clara now, raw and unguarded. "I told myself if I never let anyone matter again, I'd never fail them again." "You rode into a blizzard for my daughter," Clara said. "You didn't fail her. You didn't fail Hannah either. You just weren't given a choice that time. You are now, and you're choosing right." Word of the ride reached town before Josiah was even back on his feet. Wendell made sure of it. telling anyone who'd listen how the old rancher near died, bringing medicine home to a child that wasn't his own blood. The same men who'd mocked him at the EDO mercantile came by with firewood and no words for their silence. Even Emmett Bennett, whatever his reasons, let the note quietly lapse rather than be the man remembered for foreclosing on a hero. By the time the first thaw came, Ruth was strong enough to walk the ridge on her own 2 feet, Clara beside her, Josiah a step behind, carrying nothing but his hat and an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. They stopped at the 2 small stones, Margaret's and Hannah's beside it. Ruth knelt and set down a handful of the first wildflowers of spring. "I almost asked you to bury me up here," she said to Josiah, matter of fact the way only a child recovering from near death can be. "Instead, I get to plant flowers on it. That's better, isn't it?" "That's better," Josiah agreed, and his voice didn't break, though it came close. Ruth stood and brushed the dirt from her knees, looking between the 2 adults with the plain-eyed patience of a child who already understood more than she let on. "Are you going to marry my mother?" she asked, the way she might have asked about supper. Josiah laughed, a real one, rough with disuse, the first in 11 years. "Working on it," he said. "If she'll have an old man and all his ghosts." "I've been living with your ghosts for months now," Clara said. "I don't mind them. I think they'd have liked her." Clara took his hand there on the ridge, in front of the 2 graves that had once held all the love he thought he had left, and he did not pull away. Some winters take everything from a man and leave him certain there's nothing left worth risking. And sometimes, if he's fortunate, a stranger arrives at his gate asking for nothing but a fair day's work, and asks one more question so honest it cracks him wide open and lets the spring back in. Josiah Kane didn't just offer a widow 1 job that winter. Without meaning to, he offered her a home, and without meaning to, she gave him back his reason to live in it.